With New Year's resolutions, many of us will make a vow to eat healthier, and that's a good thing. But what about our beloved pets and their nutrition? Greetings, naturopathic Dr. Dennis Black here, and I'm on a mission to provide better nutrition for cats and dogs because truthfully, all pet food is dead food, which is why we created Rough Greens and Meow Greens in the first place. We bring their food back to life with live vitamins, minerals, probiotics, enzymes, omega oils, antioxidants, and so much more. All in a tasty formula that your dog and cat will love. You can improve your pet's coat, digestion, energy, and have less vet bills. Let 2025 bring a new year and a new pet. Get a Jumpstart trial bag, normally $20. Get a 100% discount with promo code BESTFRIEND. You discover the shipping. Go to roughgreens.com, use promo code BESTFRIEND. Bring your pet's food back to life with Rough Greens. So good, your pet will ask for it by name.
If you're a maintenance supervisor for a commercial property, you've had to deal with everything from leaky faucets to flickering light bulbs. But nothing's worse than that ancient boiler that's lived in the building since the day it was built, 50 years ago. It's enough to make anyone lose their cool. That's where Grainger comes in. With industrial-grade products and dependable fast delivery, Grainger can help with any challenge. From worn-out components to everyday necessities. Call, click Grainger.com, or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.
Now, the Hunt Palmer Show.
Yes! I feel like I've been waiting for this my entire life.
You're listening to the Hunt Palmer Show on 104.5 ESPN Baton Rouge.
Jolly good fun. Jolly good.
Locking down the middle of the day.
America's favorite daytime fun show.
Live from the Mercedes-Benz of Baton Rouge studio. This is Hunt Palmer.
To Wednesday edition of the Hunt Palmer Show. Half the work week is now in the rearview mirror. Half the first work week of 2025. Appreciate you spending it with us here on 104.5 ESPN Baton Rouge, officially working towards the weekend. A lot of football to get to in this hour. We're talking about Ryan Ramczyk retiring and then some potential candidates for the New Orleans Saints coming up here at 2:15. And then we'll talk Will Campbell in the latest mock draft at 2:30. But we got to talk some hoops here at the top of the hour as we do each week with Matthew Brune, part of the Bengal Tiger team over there on 3. Matthew, how we doing?
Hey, Hunt, doing well. Just trying to stay warm.
Yeah, well, it was cold in Columbia last night in more ways than one. LSU kind of run off the floor by Missouri, if we're being honest, last night. Did that surprise you?
It did. I was hoping that we would see the resilience that we saw, from this team in the games against, Florida State, UCF, and even Kansas State. But those games seem like a distant memory at this point. And unfortunately, this is now 3 straight losses against P4 teams here, if you include the SMU game. So SMU, Vanderbilt, Missouri, obviously the last 2 being conference games. Missouri just got to the free throw line. They hit threes offensively. They were in complete control of this one, and LSU does not have the offense to match or even get close to, scoring in the 80-point range.
What do you now take from Kansas State, Florida State, UCF? I mean, they handled themselves pretty well in those games. I realized Jalen Reed was around, but what do you now assess as this situation?
I think the SEC is just legitimately just better than anything that they've seen to this point. Pitt is the only team that I think is even in the conversation. The Pitt's the only top 50 team that they played in the non-conference. SMU's around that range, so if you want to include them too, but you can. But they lost those 2 games, and the SEC is filled with top 50 teams. I tweeted it last night. Last year, the SEC had, I believe it was 6 or 7. I don't have the tweet right off the top of my head, but and this year they're at 13. So it's just a completely different conference. LSU this year, I would argue, is honestly just as good as it was last year. Maybe it's a smidge worse, but last year's team went 9-9 in conference. This year's team, I think at this point, will be lucky to win 4 or 5 games in conference. So it's just a drastic difference in the level of competition that LSU is facing, and they're not built for this without Jalen Reed or Tyrell Ward.
The first half against Vanderbilt and the first half against Missouri, when I'm watching, LSU just seems incapable of getting into the front court and creating anything. It's just a bunch of scattered turnovers and forced plays with threes. It's just, what do you see when you watch them get into the front court in these first halves over the last 4 days?
Yeah, I think they lacked initiators. I think Jordan Sears is not a true point guard, which we've kind of known, but you've been kind of able to get away with it at times because he is a pretty good scorer. And then, Cam Carter's not a true initiator as well, not an elite passer. Victorious Miller's a freshman. And so that's where I went into the year. If you remember, I went into the year saying Jalen Reed was going to have to be a focal point of this team in the post and kind of just play through him one night. They didn't do it as much as I wanted them to do it early in the year, but now without him, they don't even have that option. They just don't have enough initiators on the court. Teams are starting to really pressure Jordan Sears and Cam Carter and Curtis Givens and make them uncomfortable, and Victorious Miller. And since they don't have any front court creation with Collins or Chess that can do things on their own, it's just they don't have enough playmakers on the court here. So it's a mess really from top to bottom. They don't have enough shooters for the spacing, and honestly, there's just not a ton of answers, I don't think, on this team right now.
Now, there were no answers for this program last year in blowout losses to Syracuse and Texas and Kansas State and an early loss to Nichols, and all of a sudden they turned it around and they played better and won 9 league games. And for that reason, we kind of lauded Matt McMahon in the non-conference of this year, saying like they weren't as talented last year and they found a way. Is there any hope that this team can improve and pick off some wins?
There's a chance they can improve. The problem becomes that their schedule is only going to get more challenging.
Yep.
Like, it is just absurdly difficult. And I don't think you can talk about it enough, that the fact that they're just going to be playing so many tough games, like even relatively easy games, like Arkansas on the 14th of this month at home. Like, that's, if you look at projections, it's like 1 point spread or something like that. But Arkansas is still a top 40 team and still, has a win over Michigan on their resume, has all these talented players like DJ Wagner and Boogie Fland, and just the talent level that of teams are going to be playing is going to be superior to them in every single game from here on out, besides maybe South Carolina. And so you look at it and say, I think this team could get better. I think they're definitely capable of muscling out a few wins like we saw in the non-conference and staying competitive, but just from a talent perspective, they're just not really close at this point to what the rest of the conference has.
Curtis Givens and Victorious Miller have had their moments. I thought Givens came on against those bad teams in December, and I thought showed some flashes last night in a blowout. Victorious Miller showed some flashes in December as well and has kind of looked overmatched in 2 conference games. But what do you think the possibility for growth for those two guys is?
Yeah, I've liked Curtis Givens. Clearly, they're both talented players. Both of them were top 60 players out of high school. I like Givens' size at 6'3", 6'4", and really strong. And then Victorious Miller, we like you said, we saw him in the non-conference, score the ball, shoot the ball at a high level. Like I said, conference teams are just going to start to really pressure Jordan Sears and Victorious Miller in these guards because they're not great initiators, not great creators. So with that being the case, I do think he's been overmatched. I mean, I think it was 0 points and 4 points in his first 2 games. Yeah. So really troublesome there. Rob Miller, the other freshman, I think has also just been overmatched at this point. He came in and I thought he was not going to play a ton because he was kind of raw out of high school, very talented, but very raw. So it's kind of the fact that they're having to play those 3 or even consider playing those 3 kind of speaks to the situation they're in.
I mean, how surprising is it that Tyrell Ward, I don't even want to talk about Ward, but Mike Williams can't get off the bench. It took 6 fouls between 2 guards to get him off the bench last year, and he was a decent freshman player for LSU last year. I know that the early performances weren't great, but still a little bit surprising based on what you would have thought maybe in like July of this year that Mike Williams is buried that far on the bench.
100%. I think it's honestly one of the bigger storylines besides Jalen Reed and Tyrell Ward being out. It's like, if you would have told me before the year this team doesn't have Jalen Reed, Tyrell Ward, or Mike Williams, I just wouldn't have assumed that this team would have done anything. Because I thought going into the year, I went and watched practices before the season. I thought Mike looked fine. I thought Tyrell looked fine. Jalen's really good. I thought those were 3 of their potentially top 6 players. And for Mike to start the year the way he did, where he was, I think it was like 2 of 18 from 3 or something, and just really was loose with the ball, was turning it over a lot, and then Victorious Miller stepped up and kind of took his spot, which is fine. Competition's good. Victorious Miller is very good, but the fact that he hasn't been what he was last year and the fact they kind of just cut him out of the rotation really quickly was definitely something I did not see coming. So again, you look at where this team was 3-4 months ago. In my head, it was Tyrell Ward starting, Jalen Reed starting, Mike Williams potentially starting. Like, I wouldn't have been mad at that. And now it's, you're left with, this kind of makeshift situation here where you're playing a lot of young guys and trying to piece it together.
Let's talk about the girls briefly. Still undefeated, but I'm not sure how good they are because they haven't played a great schedule or gotten into the grind. That's coming here pretty quickly. Your assessment of just kind of where this team is at this point, 17-0.
Yeah, I think there's fair criticism of, they barely beat Washington and they barely beat Stanford. And so and then they've had slow starts. They've been unable to kind of put away teams early, like a UIC or like an Albany at times. But through 2 conference games, I honestly think that they've been really good. Arkansas, they took care of business there. Auburn, even though it was a 10-point game, they were up 25 with 5 minutes left before Auburn went on a run to close it. So I think they're hitting their stride a bit. This Tennessee game is going to be very unique, very different. I'm not sure there's many teams in the country that play like Tennessee plays. Tennessee has the highest 3-point attempt rate in the country. They press, they rotate a lot. So it's going to be very unique to see. I don't even know what I expect from that game, but if they're able to win that one, I do think it sends another statement that this is, one of the 5 best teams in the country, even though they continue to slip in the AP poll because they've had a couple inconsistent games.
Football transfer portal is rolling. Football recruiting never stops. They've got all that covered at On 3, and Matthew Brune's all over that football and basketball beat as well. Go check out the Bengal Tiger, part of the On 3 network. Matthew's with us every Wednesday at the top of hour number 2. Thanks for the time, man.
Yeah, thanks. Anytime.
Matthew Brune, always with us on Wednesdays. If you're looking for basketball, which, I don't know exactly who I'm talking to there because I know how this goes, but we do have basketball available to you via the Hoops with Hunt podcast stream. Wherever you find your sound, if you want basketball content, go to Hoops with Hunt, and it's all right there. I don't know how much we're going to be able to drive you there over the next couple of months, but I'll remind you, for anyone who's looking for some basketball content, check it out over to Hoops with Hunt. I know that a lot of you do care who the New Orleans Saints hire as their head coach, and they got some salary cap relief today as one of the all-time greats is going to move on, so we'll talk about that New Orleans Saints news of the day coming up next.
At your job, do you ever have to deal with a nose roller? How about a snub pulley? Well, if you're installing a new conveyor belt system, dealing with the different components can sound like you're speaking a foreign language. Luckily, you've got a team ready to help. Grainger's technical product specialists are fluent in maintenance, repair, and operations. So whenever you want to talk shop, just reach out. Call, click Grainger.com, or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.
When we started writing our thoughts down on paper, it opened up endless possibilities. Ideas could grow beyond the borders of the mind, and it changed the world. Somewhere along the way, we lost touch with paper, distracted by devices made for every purpose except thinking and focus. On edge, waiting for the next notification. But what if new technology didn't pull us away from paper, but brought us closer to it? Listen. That's not paper. It's the sound of the new Remarkable Paper Pro, rewriting the future. A paper tablet with a true color ink display, gentle reading light, and unheard of tactility, with digital features for taking notes, thinking, and organizing, without any distractions. Paper is about to change the world again. Get your paper tablet at remarkable.com today.
The Hunt Palmer Show.
Genesis of Baton Rouge. Every car on the lot at Genesis of Baton Rouge is online at genesisofbatonrouge.com. Safety is a big, big deal. Big, big deal. And every single model in the Genesis line, from the entry level all the way to the highest end model, it's a pretty big gap. They've all got the same safety features. They don't look at the highest end, say we'll put and then they go, we're not going to do anything on the bottom end. No, that's not how it works. Safety is vitally important, and it's very important to the folks over at Genesis. So if safety is something you're considering, every single model was given the IIHA top safety picks. Some of them were given the top safety picks plus. If you think Genesis, think luxury. Driving around town, see a car, and you're, what is it? Genesis. Go check them out. If you're buying a car in Baton Rouge, the odds are you're going to be on Airline Highway. You might as well go check out Genesis of Baton Rouge right there at Pico. It's just across from Women's Hospital, and you'll love your time at Genesis of Baton Rouge. And if you make that purchase, 10-year, 100,000-mile warranty with every new vehicle purchase at Genesis of Baton Rouge. Start that process online at genesisofbatonrouge.com. Genesis of Baton Rouge, genesisofbatonrouge.com.
This is the Hunt Palmer Show on 104.5 ESPN, Baton Rouge.
Hope your Wednesday's going awesome. Thanks for hanging out with us on 104.5 ESPN Baton Rouge. Thanks to Matthew Brune for making a little bit of time. I'll put basketball in the rearview mirror for the day, I think, thankfully. LSU back at it on Saturday against Ole Miss in Oxford. Let's transition over to football. Names continue to surface for New Orleans Saints potential interviews and head coaches. Some of them are being reported, then they're refuted, but we're getting a reasonable list of some of the guys that are on this list to this point. There is a report from Jonathan Jones of NFL on CBS. The Saints have scheduled an interview with Miami Dolphins defensive coordinator Anthony Weaver for today, Wednesday. We know that New York Giants offensive coordinator and assistant head coach Mike Kafka is scheduled to interview on Friday. Aaron Glenn, the defensive coordinator of the Lions, expected sometime between Thursday and Saturday, as the Lions will have a bye this week, so they've got a little bit of time on their hands. And I'm not going to necessarily dive deep into all of these candidates and their entire backgrounds. We can do that as we feel like it gets narrowed down. There are absolutely 10 names that have surfaced as possibilities for the Saints at this point. So for me to sit here and go through the background of 20 years of 10 guys and go through 200 years of coaching is not necessarily a necessity at this point. But I'm interested at some of these names and kind of the background the Saints are looking for. Because if you look at Anthony Weaver, that's a guy who feels like, as a defensive-minded coach, is a culture builder. That's kind of his reputation in the NFL. Relates very well to players, kind of runs a CEO type deal. The Lions are not built on their defense at this point. That's an offensive football team at this point. But he's a guy that's thought of as a culture builder. Mike Kafka is a guy who his background is really based in Andy Reid. That's a guy who Andy Reid pegged out of college as a guy who wanted to play for him. He did play for him in Philadelphia. Then he stopped playing football, went and was a grad assistant at Northwestern, and then joined Andy Reid's staff for a little bit at Kansas City, where he's working with Reid and Mahomes. And so the intrigue is that he spent some time under one of the greatest coaches of this generation. You look at Aaron Glenn, that's a guy with ties to the Saints. That's a guy who is a defensive-minded coach, but also a guy that is thought of as a really great communicator with players. And I started to look at some of the backgrounds of some of the best coaches in the NFL currently. And there's a good mix between guys who you think of as just kind of CEOs. I'm here to run it. It's not necessarily my scheme that we're running. I'm going to bring in coordinators to that, but I'm going to run this organization. I'm going to communicate. I've got connections throughout the league. I'm going to make sure our staff is good. I'm going to make sure our scouting department is good. I'm going to make sure that everything is running the way that it should. And I'll lead the team on Sundays while the coaches on the side, either side of the ball, handle the coaching. Guys like Dan Campbell, who's a tight ends coach. He's a culture guy. John Harbaugh was a special teams coach. He's a culture guy. Been incredible in the league. Mike Tomlin was a defensive coordinator for one season in the NFL. That's a guy who's built an incredible culture, and they've used different offensive coordinators. Now, a lot of it was with Ben Roethlisberger, but a lot of different offensive coordinators, defensive coordinators have come and gone, but he's kind of held it together. That's the culture guys in the NFL. That's a little bit harder to find, but really good when it works. A little bit harder to find than the scheme guys. You look at Kyle Shanahan. That's a scheme guy. as long as he's the head coach, that you're going to cycle through quarterback coaches and offensive coordinators, but he's going to be the guy that's putting in the offense, and he'll just kind of keep plugging it along, and you got to make sure that the guys up top with John Lynch and company are restocking the shelves, but he's going to run that scheme. Sean McVay is the same way in Los Angeles. That's a scheme guy on offense. Kevin O'Connell in Minnesota, who's had a great year this year, that's a scheme guy on offense. Andy Reid is a scheme guy. That's his offense. It was his offense in Philly. It's his offense in Cincinnati. Matt LaFleur is the same way. Sean Payton's the same way. Bill Belichick was the same way on the defensive side of the ball. That can also happen. Rex Ryan was a defense guy when he was having success with the Jets. There are two different ways to kind of look at this. And as I was evaluating these candidates, and I'm not ready, as I just said, to like completely go all in on going through the entire background of every single coach that gets mentioned. But I am, I think, in a position, and I say that because I don't think the Saints are going to hire a coach for 2 weeks. So as I say that, I want to kind of get a picture of what are the characteristics. And I know that if you've listened to some of the shows here, like Matt on AFR, will tell you, I want a young offensive guy. You had the old defensive guy, give me the young offensive guy. You know who's a young offensive guy? Sean Payton. Like that's kind of what he's looking at. And I went through that list there, and Kyle Shanahan was a young offensive guy, and Sean McVay was a young offensive guy. So was Kevin O'Connell and Matt LaFleur. They were all young offensive guys. But there are defensive guys as well. And I think that Aaron Glenn would fit that mold. But I'm looking at what characteristics am I looking at? And I keep going back to the fact that I think the scheme is the most important thing to me. It's a constant. I realize there are two different worlds, but you knew what Nick Saban's defense was going to do. You know what Kirby Smart's defense is going to do. You knew what Steve Spurrier's offense was going to do. You knew what Urban Meyer's offense was going to do. And that's college football's a different world. But we talk about both here, and I rattled through a lot of the offensive guys on this list too. And I think if you can always have that scheme, and then you can find that quarterback, I think that's where it pops. And I think it's the easiest way to the top. Look, myself very, very much included, I made fun of the Dan Campbell hire because of the press conference. I will hold my hand up on that till the day I put up the microphone, because that was a ridiculous press conference. But his guys bought into it, and more importantly than the players buying in, which they have to buy in. You lose the locker room, you're toast. But you can have a lot of player buy-in. If your scheme stinks, you're toast. He went and got Ben Johnson, and Aaron Glenn's done a really good job too. And that's the key. And I don't know, because Ben Johnson and Aaron Glenn are going to take head coaching jobs, I feel pretty confident, this year. So what does Dan Campbell do then? Is it as good? I don't know, because I don't have a constant. I would give him a good chance. He's been in the league a long time. He's now built a culture that attracts young coaches, and maybe you give him a pretty good opportunity to go get the next great pair of coordinators. It could happen. Nick Saban hired a ton of good offensive coordinators, and that wasn't really his side of the ball. Different sport, I know. Different league. But as I look at this with the Saints, I'm starting to think that I want the guy with the scheme. Like, I don't need Darren Rizzi, sorry. Did a great job infusing some life into that locker room for 2 weeks. And there's absolutely value in that. But it makes me nervous. And in this market, even if you're just a Saints fan who's not tied directly to LSU, and you're listening to this or you're checking us out on YouTube and you don't care about LSU, but LSU hired Ed Ogeron. That's a culture guy. And man, did he go restock the shelves? And man, did he keep Dave Aranda? And did he get Joe Brady? And they made it. I mean, it was beautiful. And then Steve Ensminger quit, and Joe Brady left, and Dave Aranda took a head coaching job. And it cratered. It doesn't matter why. It just matters that it did. And as I look at the Saints, I want that scheme to be attached to it. So you got to give me a guy with a lot of experience as a defensive coordinator who's going to bring that in. That was Dennis Allen. Didn't work. Or give me a guy on the offensive side of the ball. There seem to be more of those in the mix here. And I mentioned yesterday that Todd Monken would be my pick as a guy who's actually been a head coach and had the scheme. But I feel like as I look around the league, you look at the most successful coaches, I think more often than not, they come with a scheme background. And that's where I would go if I were the New Orleans Saints. There's more Saints news today that we want to get to, and it's disappointing news for sure, certainly not unexpected news. The news that Ryan Ramczyk's retirement papers will be filed with the NFL, and his playing career will come to an end. That's not surprising news. We kind of felt that way as you looked at this situation last spring. You got the sense from talking to folks that cover the team day to day that Ryan Ramczyk's career was probably done. You found out in training camp that he was not going to be a part of this Saints team. And so I think the most important thing we do here is just talk about the incredible career that Ryan Ramczyk enjoyed in New Orleans. We have talked a ton about how vital the draft is going to be for the New Orleans Saints in the next couple of years. You have got to hit on guys in the draft early and often. And the Saints took Ryan Ramczyk in the 2017 draft out of Wisconsin. And this dude was one of the premier right tackles in the game of football for a handful of years. He was a first-team All-Pro in 2019. He was a second-team All-Pro in 18 and 20. He and Lane Johnson were kind of the top two guys in the sport. And unfortunately, at a position where you do see guys excel in their early 30s, which you don't see a ton of that at running back. Sometimes you kind of run out of steam at corner at that age. But tackles and guards can play, and centers can play into their early 30s. And Ryan Ramczyk's only 30 years old, and his career appears to be done due to those knee injuries. But a really, really great Saint and a huge hit in the draft for New Orleans. These are the kind of guys they have got to find a way to land and get younger and cheaper. And as I mentioned, younger and cheaper, Ryan Ramczyk moves on, so does his money. There is still going to be a cap hit here, but Ramczyk is going to reduce his 2024 base salary from $18 million to the league minimum, which is $1.255 million, and that creates about $16.7 million in cap space for the Saints in 2025. You've still got a long way to go. You've still got $50+ million that you've got to move around for New Orleans and whoever this new head coach is going to be. But the fact is that you're moving in the right direction there because of Ramczyk. Would the new coach rather have a second-team All-Pro right tackle making a good chunk of change? Yeah, at 30 years old, probably would prefer that as opposed to him moving on. But Ryan Ramczyk not going to be able to play, so he will free up a little bit of room. There are going to be some more moves that are made to chip away at the deficit. This is very, very much commonplace for New Orleans. It's complicated, and that's not something I'm going to proclaim to be completely proficient in, but I do understand that they get through these gymnastics each and every year. And I will say this. Nothing that they did outside of Kamara, which I disagreed with at the time and still do today, nothing that they did outside of Kamara in last offseason has significantly hampered them moving forward, and now you clean up a little bit more room with Ramczyk moving on. Derek Carr is still the biggest piece here, and that's either going to be a huge chunk of your salary cap in 2025 because he's on the team or because it's dead money, but that's a huge domino that's going to fall here eventually. But Ramczyk's finally did fall today, according to reports. They'll clear that $16.7 million, 50 more to clean up. They'll do some restructuring, but I'm hopeful that this is all part of a new leaf that they're turning over as far as the money goes. And every indication outside of Kamara has been that that's the case. So very, very disappointed that Ryan Ramczyk has moved on, but it's just part of football. There's just nothing you can do about those chronic injuries, and he tried to gut it out in the 2023 season and tried to play through it the best he could, but there was a lot of pain. He just wasn't a player that we had grown accustomed to seeing in New Orleans. So a great Saint, a great draft pick, a symbol of what they need more of moving forward, and then a little relief on the salary cap side of things as you move into 2025 and look for a new team. He'll go to into retirement as one of the better draft picks of the last decade for New Orleans. Didn't get as much out of him as maybe you hoped, but great player for the Saints. All right, that's our Saints update for the day. If you're looking for Saints content, you can certainly find it. Appreciate y'all for sneaking this out over at YouTube. Hunt on Saints, certainly on the podcast networks. Hunt on Saints as well. We're talking Saints every single day as far as they carry this searching coach on. So if you're looking for the latest updates, you can certainly find it at Hunt on Saints wherever you find your sound, or on LouisianaSports.net. If you look at LouisianaSports.net right now and you go up to the top and click on teams, you can look at our Saints football tab, and Ross has just been churning out every single name that comes out, from Anthony Weaver to Mike Kafka to Davis Webb from the Broncos, who is apparently in the mix. Mike Vrabel's name has come up. Darren Rizzi looking at the Jets. Like, there's a ton of information there at LouisianaSports.net if you're looking to stay up to date on all that. So bookmark that page if you're a big Who Dat fan, and check out Ross's work each and every day. Let's step aside. When we come back, mock draft. What's next for Will Campbell? It's next on the Hunt Palmer Show.
The Hunt Palmer Show.
One Bath and Closets. OneBathAndClosets.com is the website. David Duvall and his team, 30 years redesigning and remodeling bathrooms and closets. Just go to the website, OneBathAndClosets.com. David and his team have done a great job over the last 8 months of uploading new pictures of some of their great work. Just take a look at it. It's beautiful. It's incredibly functional. And the best part is that it's customized. So you create the specs for what David creates at your home. You don't have to move to greatly improve your living situation. Whether it's closets, you don't have enough room, you're cramming stuff in with coat hangers, you got suitcases here and there, you don't have enough room for all your shoes. If that's the case, they can build you a new closet. If you don't ever use that tub, want to take it out and put in a gorgeous walk-in shower, floors, toilets, the whole deal, they can handle it. It'll be one call that you make, and I can promise you this: they will not be coming back 3 weeks, 4 weeks, 5 weeks later to fix all the issues that may not have been completely resolved the first time. They do it right the first time and leave the competition behind. It's David Duvall and One Bath and Closets. Get that free consultation today by going to OneBathAndClosets.com, OneBathAndClosets.com.
You're listening to The Hunt Palmer Show on 104.5 ESPN, Baton Rouge.
All right, it is officially mock draft season. We've got a lot of the picks already set up in the NFL draft. Certainly the playoff teams have to shake themselves out, but we know that the Tennessee Titans will pick first. Cleveland's there at second. The Giants will pick at third, and so on. The Patriots actually moved themselves back to the fourth selection. But I was looking through the latest mock draft up at ESPN from Jordan Reed, who's, of course, their draft analyst. And I was curious where Will Campbell would end up. And you've seen a lot of variation with Will Campbell from into the top 5 all the way towards the back end of the first round. And I think it has a lot to do with the projection on position and where Will Campbell projects to play. I didn't see entering the season with some mock drafts that were obviously way too early before the college season started, any projection that had Will Campbell at guard. And you're now starting to see that a little bit more. I would suggest that, obviously if you're a true franchise left tackle, that's the best thing for your draft stock. But the versatility of it is not necessarily a huge negative. And I think Will Campbell could play guard, but I do think that the teams are going to give him a chance to play out at tackle. And so in this mock draft, Will Campbell is mocked to the Chicago Bears at number 10. I think that makes a lot of sense. The Bears' offensive line was atrocious this year. Caleb Williams was battered and bruised. He was bordering on David Carr's all-time sack record by the end of the season. And they've got to get that cleaned up. Because, when you go into this year looking at the Bears, you're looking at a team saying, they got Keenan Allen. Okay, that's pretty good. They drafted one of the best receivers in the draft in Rome Odunze and got DJ Moore. And, Caleb Williams comes in. They got a lot of toys. They ought to be pretty good offensively. Well, they weren't good offensively. They were terrible offensively because they couldn't block anybody. So Will Campbell makes a ton of sense there to Chicago at 10. And it got me thinking, 10 is really early in the draft, and LSU has put defensive backs that early, has put running backs like Leonard Fournette that early. Guys like on the defensive line have obviously gone that high with Tyson Jackson and Glenn Dorsey and some of those guys. Kiki Mingo was an early pick. You've had Burrow and Daniels and Jamarcus at quarterback. You've put wide receivers all over the place in the first round of the draft. But offensive line has been a tough sled for LSU in the draft. I mean, you're looking at pure tackles from LSU and where they've gone in the draft. You're looking at Austin Deculus in the 6th round. You're looking at Gerald Hawkins in the 4th round. You're looking at Sadiq Charles went in the 4th round. Joe Barksdale was a 3rd round pick. Even go back to Andrew Whitworth, he was a 2nd round pick coming out of LSU. Will Campbell is set to be the highest drafted LSU offensive tackle in decades, going back to long way. And the question is he the best offensive tackle in LSU history? And again, I hear a lot on Twitter. I hear a lot on message boards. And I know how disappointed a lot of LSU fans were in the offensive line's run blocking this year. And that's a huge part of playing on the offensive front. And Will Campbell is not immune from some of that blame. He did not have a great year in run blocking. But you're talking about an elite pass blocker. And that is the case with every scout who takes a look and writes a feature on Will Campbell. The breakdown here in this from Jordan Reed says he's a consistent technician, a 6'6", 323-pound polished blocker who can step in as a day one starter at either tackle or guard and help protect Caleb Williams. Will Campbell basically gave up like 4 sacks in 3 years. If I would have told you when he signed as a 5-star recruit out of Neville in an early enrollee, that he was going to give up 4 sacks in 3 years, you would have gone, holy crap, give me that guy. And now that I sit here and look at the mock draft and try to debate whether or not he's the best tackle in school history, I bet a lot of you that would have taken him with 4 sacks in 3 years on signing day and going, that's incredible, are now going to look at it and go, underrated, overrated, didn't perform. That's what I see on Twitter. And I'm like, really? Is that really how you feel? Because the statistics are pretty jarring, and the pros still like him. He's mocked in the top 10. Now, I'm not trying to sit here today and take 21-year-old Will Campbell and directly compare him with Andrew Whitworth, Hall of Famer. Like, that's not a fair comp for someone who hasn't played a snap in the NFL. But if we're just talking about career at LSU and then what that merited in the draft, which doesn't tell the whole story, we know that. Glenn Dorsey was a better college player than he was a pro. But I think you could make the case based on accolades, based on his draft position, and the fact that he was the starting left tackle the second he stepped on campus, not a redshirt guy like Faneca, not a redshirt guy like Mawai, that he's the best offensive tackle in school history. He might not be. I'm not telling you that he is. But he's in the discussion, and I think that crystallizes a bit if he's the 7th or 8th pick in the draft. Different sport than it was in 1996. 1996, you got Herb Tyler running the option. It's 3 yards in a cloud of dust if you weren't in Gainesville. And now you're spreading it out and you're running read option and it's zone blocking on run schemes, and it's a different world. I get it. So it's hard to compare one guy to one guy in a different era. But if Will Campbell goes in the top 10 of the draft, like that's a pretty loud statement for a multi-time All-American and a guy who helped pave the way for a Heisman Trophy winner. One of the best ever. And I think it's been important to me that I try to convey to those who are disgruntled with the fact that LSU went 8-4 and couldn't run the ball as well as they wanted to this year, that doesn't completely disparage Will Campbell's entire career because he was part of an offensive line that didn't get enough push this year. It's the fun thing to do to jump down your team's throat whenever anything's happening. We're dealing with it with basketball right now. But I think it's important for me to kind of try to put that in perspective and see if I can't maybe reshape your opinion a little bit based on what everybody else outside of our little bubble thinks. Because let's be honest, the Bears aren't going to pass on Will Campbell because LSU went 8-4. They're not going to pass on Will Campbell because LSU failed to get a push on the right side of the offensive line in the run game more often than not. Now, they may check out the tape and see that there are some run game deficiencies and that he may need to play guard instead of tackle, but he's a great player. Great ambassador for LSU. Incredibly durable. And again, I think if I told you what he was going to be when he signed on the dotted line and early enrolled from Neville, right when Brian Kelly got here, I think you all would have taken that. And he deserves to go down with some of the greatest offensive linemen in LSU history. He's got a long, long, long way to go to join guys like Faneca and Whitworth and Mawai at the pro level. At the college level, he's in that discussion. I don't think there's any doubt. If you're looking for LSU football content, you can find it on YouTube or wherever you find your podcast, Hunt on LSU. We continue to tell that each and every day because it's new. We did have Hunt on LSU on YouTube, and we've had that for a couple of years, but it's all in podcast form as well now. We've been looking at those numbers and appreciate you all so much for subscribing to the channel. If you're really interested in LSU football and you don't want to wade through the basketball talk on this show, some of you don't want to wade through the Saints talk on this show, you just want your LSU football goods. It's there in podcast form, and it's all broken out for you. Hunt on LSU. Just search it. Wherever you find your podcast, you can find us. Step aside one more time. We'll come back and close things out. It's a Wednesday edition of the Hunt Palmer Show.
The Hunt Palmer Show.
Boudreaux's Electrical Services. Neil and Melissa have been rocking and rolling for 40 years down there in Napoleonville. If you hear that and you go, Napoleonville, that's not that close to me. Well, hold your horses. Maybe it is close to you. Got a lot of folks that listen down in the 985 and down in the river parishes, down the bayou. But we also have a Boudreaux's Electrical location in the 225 in Gonzales. That number is 225-300-9389, 225-300-9389. If you want to call them at the same number they had for 40 years in Napoleonville, they'll answer you there too. It doesn't matter which number you call because they can service you anywhere in our listening area. 985-397-1562 is that number in Napoleonville. Give yourself the peace of mind to know the power is not going out at your home. It's not going out at your place of work either. Boudreaux's Electrical can install a Generac home standby generator to protect you from those power outages that are inevitable here in South Louisiana. It's a nuisance when that power goes out. I tell the story all the time trying to watch Paul Skeens pitch in the first game of the College World Series against Tennessee. My power goes out because we had a thunderstorm come through at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Don't be like Hunt. Now, I didn't have Boudreaux's Electrical then because we were going to move. We're set now. Boudreaux's Electrical, boudreauxelectrical.com.
This is the Hunt Palmer Show on 104.5 ESPN, Baton Rouge.
The Hooters College Football Bowl Pick'em Challenge presented by Yingling is underway. Make sure to check the leaderboard in your inbox to see if you qualified for the final round of picks and your shot at $1,000 cash and $200 from Hooters. Our grand prize one will be notified at January 13th. It's the Hooters College Football Bowl Pick'em Challenge presented by Yingling at 1045ESPN.com. And we also have some college football playoff semifinal matchups heading your way. You can tune in for Notre Dame and Penn State. That is tomorrow night at 6:30. And then Ohio State and Texas will be Friday at 6:30. Your home for the college football playoff and national championship is 1045 ESPN Baton Rouge.
All right, Beck. We certainly have to play Take It or Leave It. I'm going to give you one first before we do.
Okay.
Cliff Kingsbury apparently has been requested as an interview for the New Orleans Saints. What about Cliff Kingsbury as the new Saints coach? Take it or leave it?
Just leave it alone.
I'll say no on that one.
Why not? Cliff.
He had Kyler Murray. And,
he did?
And they weren't very good.
No?
And
is Kyler Murray good?
They seem to be doing a little bit better in the last few years. At least this year, anyway. They did play. They almost made the playoffs.
I feel like they had that 1 year with Warner and Fitzgerald. That is just a pitiful organization. They don't. They're just boring. Like what do the Cardinals do?
They wasted Larry Fitzgerald's
any fans?
prime.
Does anybody care about the Cardinals? Maybe not. I don't know.
Yeah, they're kind of like the Lions, except the Lions actually got good the last few years. Like
the Lions have been bad.
They both had generational wide receivers and pretty much wasted their entire careers there. And the Cardinals, I don't know. I mean, I think Kyler Murray can be a playoff caliber quarterback, but it seems like they
should have played second base, Beck. That's what it comes down to.
Maybe
really should.
I think he's going to be making
franchise
a lot
quarterback.
More money.
That's a lot of money.
Yeah, I think so.
Take it or leave it.
Take it or leave it.
or leave it.
Today's hottest stories in sports, news, and sometimes even Hunt's life. The question is, will he take them or leave them?
Just take it.
All right, there was some rumors going around about Bill Belichick and a parent interest possibly in actually returning to the NFL after just taking the job at North Carolina. There were some rumors saying that he was talking to Tom Brady, who is now a minority owner of the Las Vegas Raiders, who, of course, just fired their head coach, Antonio Pierce. Belichick, there are sources coming out saying that this was not accurate. He was simply just talking to Tom Brady, but Belichick doing North Carolina like he did the Jets. Take it or leave it.
I'm going to leave it. He's got a buy-in in his contract. That says he only has to pay $1 million if he leaves immediately. And I just don't think it's going to go to the Raiders where they don't have a quarterback. So why would you go there?
Doesn't make any sense. All right, next one, staying in the NFL, the 49ers are set to rehire Robert Saleh as their defensive coordinator, bringing Saleh back. Take it or leave it.
I'll take it. I think he did a good job there. It obviously garnered him the Jets job. It's an offensive organization, as we talked about. They got to play a little better defense. Personnel's generally been pretty good. They got to stay healthier than they did last year, but there's familiarity there. That's a guy that they trust. I think it's fine.
All right, last one here in a shortened edition of Take It or Leave It. The New Orleans Pelicans are going to rest Zion Williamson after bringing him back last night in a losing effort to the Timberwolves. They are in a back-to-back hunt, which means that Zion Williamson cannot play because he is incapable of playing in back-to-back games. Take it or leave it.
Take it.
I'll take it.
Can't do it. Here's the deal with Zion. You can't trade him if he gets hurt. If he doesn't play, he's got a better chance of not getting hurt. It doesn't matter if they win or lose. In fact, I would rather they lose because you probably need to get back up to the top of the draft again. So, sit him. That's
okay, but
where it's got to be.
He has to.
He had a sick windmill dunk there last year.
He did. Nice 360 last night. Yeah, nice 360 windmill, and then they were losing. They lost that game, so it didn't really matter too much. But I think he has to play just to prove to other teams that he can still play.
Is there a better chance if he plays that he proves he can still play, or that he proves he gets hurt?
Well, that's a good question.
You got to sit him on the bench
a bit of a conundrum
and just have them think maybe he can still play, even though probably can't.
What can they realistically even get for him at this point? Can they even get a first-round pick for him?
They could get a sack of basketballs. Good. What do they use in the NBA? Spaldings?
I think it's is it Wilson? I don't know actually. That's pretty bad. I feel like it's either Spalding or Wilson. It's probably Spalding. Who cares?
They could probably get a bag of both.
Do you really think they couldn't get a first-round pick for him?
They could get a first-round pick.
They can get a first for him.
Nobody cares about their first-round picks.
Not really.
They'll protect him if they need to.
Yeah.
That's it. We got a lot of basketball talk, a lot of Saints talk, some LSU football talk with Will Campbell. If you missed any of it, catch it on demand wherever you find your sound, or, of course, on YouTube. That's going to do it for us on this Wednesday. Matt will drive you home on After Further Review with all the latest on the Saints coaching search and probably a little bit of basketball, too. We're back tomorrow, same time, same place. The Hunt Palmer Show.
The Hunt Palmer Show.